Ever since playing Mass Effect for the first time when I was around 12 years old, I had instantly become a massive BioWare fan. And naturally, after finishing Mass Effect 3 for the first time, I wanted to check out what other games they had in their catalog. Then I found a series that seemed like Mass Effect, but fantasy, and I immediately went to my local GameStop, or EB Games at the time, to pick up used copies of Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2, and go on yet another BioWare adventure. But I never finished either of them. Dragon Age Origins has always been heralded as the best in the series, at least plot-wise, and while that may be true, there's something about this game and its sequels that I could just never get into. Over the course of several years, I've tried to give them another shot, but for some reason or another, it just didn't click for me. It was so weird because I could play Mass Effect over and over again and never get tired of it. In fact, I could replay the entire trilogy over and over again and love it just the same. Dragon Age, on the other hand, I couldn't even make it through one playthrough, and the biggest reason might be due to length. Now, these games aren't particularly long by today's standards, but 50 plus hours at the time was far too many for a single game to me. I struggled to commit to a game that long, especially one with more complex systems, and generally, I just kind of felt overwhelmed by it all. Even with Dragon Age Inquisition, I had struggled, but it was by far the most accessible to me. However, with the release of Dragon Age the Veilguard coming soon, I figured now was the time to jump back into it, starting from the beginning again. But as someone who tries to keep up with the latest games, it kind of felt like too much of a commitment to play 3 50-hour games back to back, so after a few hours of revisiting Origins again, I decided to just give Dragon Age Inquisition another chance. I figured if one was important to play before the Veilguard, it was this one, and I'm so glad I did. Dragon Age Inquisition is far from being a perfect game, and may not be the best in the series, but there's no denying this is still a really good game. It's definitely not for everyone, no game is. It's in its combat and its exploration that may drive people away. I know it did for me, and I think it's one of the biggest differences between this and Mass Effect. It's in its gameplay system, mainly the combat style. However, if you feel you can get over that sort of hurdle, there's some pretty great stuff here. But also, can I just say that the music is phenomenal? I mean, of course, but also the starting menu just really reels you in. And the way that it opens up into the game is just something that you don't see a lot of anymore. One thing that BioWare does well, aside from great world building, is its excellently written characters. BioWare are masters at this, and it's probably the biggest pull that got me to stick it out and see it through. Because to me, character development is probably one of the most important aspects in good storytelling. Of course, I'm all in for games that have deep and complex gameplay, fun exploration, and all the likes, but the games that stuck with me the most and moved me the most were games with well-written characters. Games like Red Dead Redemption 2 or The Witcher 3 have such detailed and well-made open worlds to explore, but the thing that impressed me most about those games, that I had not anticipated when I first played them, was how much I had fallen in love with all those characters. And Dragon Age, like Mass Effect, has done exactly the same. And maybe it's because I've tried to play Inquisition a few times already, but playing through it from start to finish made me feel like I was meeting old friends again for the first time in a long time, even though I had spent maybe only a few hours with them prior. Every companion you meet through the journey brings something unique to the table, whether it's their background, their personal struggles, or their perspective on the world around them. This makes them more than just party members. They feel like friends, allies, and sometimes even adversaries who challenge your decisions. Take Cassandra, for example. She's a character who on the surface comes off as strict, driven by duty and faith. But as you peel back her layers, you discover her vulnerabilities, and the burdens she carries. She's not just a seeker of truth, but someone searching for her own place in the world that's constantly changing. Her journey from a rigid enforcer of the status quo to someone who learns to question and grow is one that really resonated with me, and you can see it even clearer if you decided to romance her. Then there's Varric, the charming rogue with a heart of gold, and a quill as sharp as his wit. Varric is the glue that holds the group together, providing not just comic relief, but a grounded human-esque perspective in the midst of all the chaos. His relationship with the Inquisitor, as well as his loyalty to his friends, makes him an anchor in the story, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, a little humor and humanity, or humanity adjacent, can go a long way. And honestly, I think that's why I consider him my best friend. Sarah is a spirited, chaotic, and unapologetically unique elven archer who brings a down-to-earth perspective that starkly contrasts with the more high-minded ideals of other characters. What makes Sarah so compelling is her honesty. She's blunt, sometimes to a fault, and unafraid to challenge the Inquisitor if she disagrees with their approach. Beneath her jester-like demeanor lies a fiercely loyal friend who cares deeply about those she chooses to protect. People may not see it at first, but her complexity comes across best in her personal quest, where you can gain insight into her history and the emotional wounds that she carries. The more you get to know her, the more you realize that her distrusting nature is a shield she uses to guard against betrayal and disappointment. The Iron Bull, or simply Bull, is a Qunari mercenary with a reputation that precedes him. Leader of the Chargers, a diverse, fiercely loyal group of warriors, the Iron Bull is more than just a brute. He's a strategic, insightful character with a surprisingly nuanced approach to life. Despite his imposing size and status as a Ben Hasrath spy, he has a genuine warmth and openness that immediately sets him apart from other Qunari. His personality is big and bold, but there's a layer of intelligence and introspection underneath. Vivienne is often seen as cold or even ruthless, but her stance is complex and rooted in experience. For her, power without control is dangerous, and the chaos surrounding the Mage Rebellion reinforces her belief that mages must be tightly governed to prevent catastrophe. This perspective puts her at odds with several companions who believe in mage freedom, like me, making her a lightning rod for heated debates. Unlike the romanticized ideals of other characters, Vivienne's view is pragmatic. She values results over ideals, and believes in maintaining order, even at the cost of personal freedoms. She's not interested in being loved or understood. She is resolute in her convictions, and does not compromise her principles. Unlike Vivienne, Dorian is a Tevinter mage, and an undeniable fan favorite. With a sharp wit, suave personality, and keen intellect, Dorian challenges the stereotypes associated with Tevinter society. He's a perfect mix of charm and complexity, a man born into privilege who turned his back on his family's expectations and oppressive beliefs. His personal quest explores his relationship with his father, giving players a chance to understand the pain of being forced to live according to others' ideals. But there's a sort of sincerity about him. Dorian's journey is one of self-acceptance and courage, and the bonds he builds with the Inquisitor, whether platonic or romantic, is one of the most poignant in the game. Blackwell is introduced as a steadfast Grey Warden with a deep commitment to justice and duty. He's a man of few words, shrouded in mystery, and initially appears to embody the classic warrior archetype, and a calling to protect others. However, as Inquisition digs deeper into his story, it becomes clear that Blackwell is hiding a dark secret. Cole is one of the most unique characters in Inquisition, and really the Dragon Age series as a whole. He's a spirit of compassion who takes on a human form, often appearing ethereal and mysterious. His unusual nature, straddling the line between spirit and human, makes him inherently empathetic. Cole has the ability to feel and alleviate others' pain, but he struggles with understanding his own emotions and existence. And of course, we absolutely can't forget Solus, the elven mage whose calm demeanor hides a world of secrets. His philosophical musings and complex motivations make him one of the most intriguing characters in the game. The more you engage with Solus, the more you realize that his story is one of the most tragic and compelling arcs in Inquisition. He's a character that challenges not just the Inquisitor's beliefs, but the players as well, leading to a finale that's both surprising and inevitable, but we'll get more into that later. What makes these characters stand out isn't just their individual stories, but how they interact with each other and with you as the Inquisitor. The banter between companions, the personal quests that reveal their deeper layers, and the choices you make that affect their fate, all of this creates a rich emotional tapestry that adds depth to the game's narrative. The relationships you build with these characters feel meaningful, and by the time you reach the game's conclusion, you feel like you've truly been on a journey with them, and I think it's one of the things that separates this medium from many others. You are one of the characters, and the characters get to know you. Now, since we've been on the subject of characters, let's talk the approval system. The approval system in Origins was relatively straightforward. If you made a dialogue choice that a character approved of, you gained points. Disappoint them, and your points dropped. While the gift-giving mechanic was a good backup, it also meant that approval sometimes felt a little too forgiving, if not shallow. If a relationship was on rocky ground, you could just gift your way to wooing someone rather than necessarily repairing it through meaningful dialogue or actions. This approach was, in some ways, more transactional than organic. Plus, it sometimes risks reducing characters to a formula. Give Morrigan gifts that align with their interests, make pro-mage choices, and voila! Approval maxed out. Fast forward to Inquisition, and the system went to the opposite extreme. Gifts were removed entirely, and the approval system in this became solely tied to the choices made in quests, combat, and larger story decisions. Dragon Age 2 worked fine, but this game in particular for some reason felt more punishing, as players had little recourse if a decision hurt a relationship. The lack of flexibility sometimes made the approval feel like a high-stakes balancing act, particularly when faced with companions like Vivienne or Solus, whose values could be hard to gauge at first. And while this raised the stakes, it also created tension for players who wanted to maintain harmony across a diverse group of companions, but found it near impossible to avoid conflict entirely. The biggest downgrade of the system is that it sometimes lacks nuance, especially since player choices aren't always black and white. You might think you're making a reasonable decision for the Inquisition, only for a companion to take issue with it because it conflicts with their personal values. For instance, siding with mages over Templars will win points with some characters, but alienate others. It makes perfect sense for a world as divided as Thedas, but it can feel punishing when you're trying to balance relationships across your diverse team. Approval is also somewhat opaque. You aren't always given clear indicators on what will trigger a drop in approval, and sometimes it can feel like you're in a trial and error guessing game just to avoid upsetting someone. So, how should we fix this moving forward? Honestly, I'm not sure. I don't know if there is a better solution to this, but I will advise that you stop worrying too much about companions and their approval ratings. Simply play how you want to play, because you will have people disagree with you no matter what, and you're at least generally given enough opportunities to raise them later, unless they greatly disapprove several times, which can be quite difficult to turn around. Though, it would have been nice to have at least a meter to help keep track of things, similar to the Paragon and Renegade system in Mass Effect. But it sounds ironic because I myself am pretty anxious towards things like this and will stress trying to please everyone, but it's something I too want to learn from. One of the major shifts in this game compared to its predecessors is the embrace of the open world design. It offers vast sprawling environments for the player to explore, each filled with quests, lore, and hidden treasures. On paper, this sounds like a dream come true, an expansive world where you can lose yourself in the wonders of Thedas. However, in practice, the experience can be a little bit of a mixed bag. When I first set foot in the hinterlands, I was struck by the sheer scale of it all. The world felt alive, with its lush forests, towering mountains, and distant ruins begging to be explored. But as I started to move through these areas, I quickly realized that the open world design came with its own set of challenges. The traversal could often feel laborious, especially since undiscovered areas were grayed out on the map. But more than that, you would assume that you're heading into the right direction when suddenly there's a mountain in front of you, or a boulder you can't pass. This isn't just a new mechanic by any means. Many games have used this to encourage exploration, but here it felt more like a chore than an adventure, trying to traverse the environment and not knowing what or where you could successfully scale up a mountain. But also, the fact that so much of the map was obscured from the start made me feel like I was constantly walking into the unknown without any real sense of direction. There were moments where I could spend significant amounts of time trying to uncover a new area, only to find that's not where I was trying to go at all. In some ways, it may even seem like it's encouraging for further exploration, but we're all short on time, and I would have rather preferred to have arrived at the destination that my marker had set. It's not Elden Ring, it's not that kind of game. The grayed out areas created a sense of obligation rather than curiosity, making me feel like I needed to uncover every inch of the map, just to see what was there, even if the content didn't always justify the effort. That said, as the game progressed, I started to adapt to this style of exploration. It took some time, but eventually I began to appreciate the slower pace, to some degree. This is because, despite the occasional frustrations with the map design, the story, the characters, and the dialogue and everything else that this game had to offer were more than strong enough to keep me pressing on. Like the game's exploration, I wasn't initially a huge fan of the combat either, as it's neither fully turn-based nor a traditional hack and slash. It's a hybrid of the two, blending elements of strategic planning with real-time action. At first, this felt awkward to me. It wasn't as straightforward as I hoped, and I found myself struggling to find a rhythm that worked. Coming from other RPGs, where combat tends to fall into more familiar patterns, Inquisition's approach felt a bit odd. The tactical camera, while offering a more strategic perspective, often felt clunky and disruptive to the flow of battle. On the other hand, going full real-time could sometimes make fights feel chaotic, with less emphasis on the thoughtful decision-making I usually enjoy in turn-based systems. But much like with the exploration, over time I began to adapt. The more I engaged with the combat, the more I started to see its strengths. The hybrid nature of the system actually allows for a great deal of flexibility. This duality actually gives you the freedom to approach battles in ways that suits your playstyle. While I could see how pausing to strategize might work for some players, I ultimately found myself preferring the real-time combat. It kept the action fluid and engaging, and I enjoyed the challenge of making quick decisions on the fly. It also encouraged me to spend time unlocking the right skills for each companion. In Mass Effect, I would usually just auto-level up, but in this, I felt the need to carefully decide which ones would be best for each character. And so, I'm sort of glad I played through Baldur's Gate 3 last year though, because I don't think I would have had the same level of patience. But what's equally important is knowing exactly who is best for each mission. Typically, I would bring along one warrior, one rogue, and one mage, so it evens out the playing field, and I always have a healer, which I feel like is really important at certain points. Having one of each type grants you versatility, and prepares you for almost any level with any assortment of enemies. Usually that would include Cassandra, Varric, and Dorian, though every so often I would switch it up to make sure I got the most out of my companions and their banter. However, sometimes you do need double the amount of one type if you know that specific enemy type could be dealt best with it. You just need to know when. As for which class you should play as is really up to you and your playstyle. When I first started years ago, I started as a rogue, but I then realized that I typically play more offensive and needed to be a bit more of a tank. That's why instead, for this playthrough, I went with the boring generic warrior build. But hey, at least it's easier to handle. One thing I think should be a more common trend by now is the use of transmogs. In any RPG, part of the fun is customizing your character, not just in terms of abilities and stats, but also in how they look. However, there were times in this game where I refrained from using the higher armor sets simply because I just didn't like how they looked. Of course, it's always better to equip stronger gear, especially when facing tougher enemies, but I've always valued having my character look a certain way, especially during cutscenes. There's something about having your character look awesome, reflecting their journey and personality, that adds to the immersion. Unfortunately, some of the armor sets, while powerful, just didn't fit the image I had in mind for my Inquisitor. This is why I rarely used any of the headgear either. I wanted to see my character's face during pivotal moments, not to have it be obscured by a helmet that often looked goofy or out of place. The only times I would reluctantly put on headgear or armor I didn't like was during particular intense battles where I needed the extra edge to boost my stats, but as soon as I was out of combat, I'd remove them at the first opportunity. It's a bit of a trade-off between style and function, and while I understand that this is a 10-year-old game, it is something I wish that had been handled differently, and is a feature I really hope BioWare includes in the Veilguard, considering so many games like Assassin's Creed have had this for years now. At least though, it was nice to be able to craft different armor sets on your own and be able to dye it almost any color you'd like. The story here in Inquisition was fairly straightforward and easy to follow, at least for me. That could possibly be because I was already familiar with some of the world and its lore from the little I played in the previous two games, but given how little it was, it's surprising that I barely felt lost. I was only lost in the plot itself, and just couldn't wait to see how it all unfolded. Though, if you, like me, had started with this entry or only played this one, don't worry if you were confused. You weren't the only one. I imagine I probably would be too had I not had any previous exposure to the world of Thedas. But I do think given enough time spent with this game, you will slowly grasp it all anyway. And as ironic as it may sound, although I ultimately decided not to begin my journey again with Origins, if you do have the time to spare to play the other two games as well, you'll probably enjoy this even more. I think when you have not only a better understanding of the world and its lore, but also many of its returning cast of characters, you'll feel a greater connection and a deeper liking to Inquisition's story. And I assume also the Veilguard. Because even as someone who didn't play through them in their entirety, I still felt a great deal of joy and excitement when characters like Hawke and Morgan returned. And playing as a new protagonist while knowing those characters feels even more so like revisiting old friends. Morgan, for example, when she appears at some point in the middle of the game, while your current protagonist is unfamiliar and potentially initially distrusting, if you had played the previous games, it feels as though you, the player, are happy to see them again as you recount the time that you spent with them. The same goes for many of your allies in Inquisition actually, like Liliana and Cassandra and Varric. And again, this is coming from someone who never finished the others, which goes to show how well written these characters are. The War Table is a central hub much like the galaxy map in Mass Effect, except it also allows you to execute strategic decisions. It's where you go to begin specific missions and unlock new regions to explore. The War Table doesn't always require your constant attention to travel to different locations. You can freely travel to some areas without needing to visit the War Table every time. The War Table itself is divided into two sections, one for Orlais and the other for Ferelden. Within these regions, you'll find various markers representing locations, missions, and requests that need to be fulfilled. This is where your advisors, Liliana, Josephine, and Cullen, come into play. Each advisor has their own strengths, and depending on the nature of the request, you'll choose who to send on these missions. But there's a catch. But once an advisor is assigned to a task, you'll have to wait for a real-time countdown timer to complete before they can be assigned to another mission. So it's pretty handy if you start a mission before ending your play session, as the timer will continue counting down even when you're not actually playing. Because by the time you return, your advisors will have completed their tasks, ready to be sent out again, so it's a good idea to do that to help move things along. These are mostly in order to increase influence or receive rewards. But even with some of the locations you can travel to, you can't access it until you unlock them with a certain amount of Inquisition power, which can be gained from doing quests and closing rifts. Now, as you accumulate influence, you'll fill an influence bar. Each time you fill this bar, the Inquisition levels up, granting you a point to spend on something called Inquisition perks. These perks are special abilities, or bonuses that can provide various advantages, some better than others, so it's important to decide carefully what you think will help the most. Though personally, I found things like extra potions and lockpicking to be the most useful. The rest, not so much. The next section will dabble into spoilers, so if you're not ready for that, here's a brief spoiler warning. It being a direct sequel, I feel confident that anything open-ended and all the mysteries they left behind will all be unveiled. Pun intended. Of course, we're all anticipating what's next for the Dreadwolf and its relationship with us, But I'm most curious about the outcome of choosing who should drink from the Well of Sorrows. That was arguably the toughest decision I made in the game. Ultimately, I decided to let the Inquisitor take it, as it felt true to the character in my specific playthrough to make that sort of sacrifice. Because not only would I not want any of my companions to face harm, therefore I wouldn't want them to drink from it, but I also didn't want Morrigan to be indebted to her mother again. Morrigan has endured a lifetime of manipulation under Flemeth, and in her own way, she deserves her freedom too. By letting the Inquisitor shoulder the burden, I felt like I was keeping Morrigan's autonomy intact, respecting her journey and the evolution of her character arc up to that point. Now with Veilguard, the impact of this choice remains to be seen, and we'll find out in mere days, but I wonder just how much it will matter in the grand scheme. Hopefully the Veilguard will take Inquisition's approach to choice and consequence even further than the previous games. It would be amazing if we see massive ripple effects from decisions that expand into unexpected outcomes, keeping us on our toes and challenging us in new ways. And by this I mean more so than before, as these are almost direct sequels to one another. It feels like the impacts are much larger, or at least they should be. Though I'm not expecting it to be story altering to the point where it's a different game. That would be silly. Just hoping that there's a greater consequence to some of these actions than usual. Now going back to the Dreadwolf himself, Solus. I have to say, the betrayal was a gut punch. Now, I won't say I didn't somewhat suspect him throughout the duration of the game. There was always something a little off about him, something that made me question his true intentions, but I really wanted to believe the best in him. He had this calm demeanor, a way of speaking that made it seem like he genuinely cared about the Inquisitor and the cause we were fighting for. I suppose that's what made the betrayal hurt even more, but perhaps I should have trusted my instincts. Not that I could actually have done anything about it by the end, but maybe I was just clinging to the hope of a good person underneath. Someone who was just misunderstood or burdened by a past we couldn't fully comprehend. What's more interesting is the potential for Solus to reflect on our relationship with him, especially if we treated him as a friend. The writers went through such great lengths to make him complex and nuanced, giving us moments where he seemed truly remorseful about his plans, as if he struggled with the weight of the decision he was making. There were hints of genuine conflict, even empathy. My hope for the next game is that, depending on how we interact with him, maybe he'll have a chance at some kind of redemption arc. Perhaps his remorse will push him to question his path or open the door to an alliance. And it's because of this, part of me wishes that we continue playing as the Inquisitor, because the relationship in Betrayal was predominantly between Solus and you. And so, not that it's unexpected or that it can't work, having a new protagonist in the Veilguard might not be as impactful as if you were the Inquisitor. That's something that I wish Dragon Age did that made Mass Effect as impactful to me as it was, because we were following Shepard throughout, and we got to know his crew more and more over the course of the trilogy. It's a nice change of pace though, and I have no doubt that they managed to make it work, but I can't help but wonder what it would be like if the protagonist and all their companions stayed the same. It's nice to see Varric front and center again though, and I'm just glad that Harding gets her chance to shine. Though I loved almost everything about this game, apart from some things I mentioned earlier, the Trespasser DLC was brutal. I don't want to say I regret playing it, because in this DLC we finally get a full-on betrayal from Solus, one that puts everything he's done into perspective and reveals the stakes of what's coming next. But wow, was this hard. And I get it, difficulty doesn't make something bad. BioWare probably intended for the DLC to be more challenging, as they do every time, to respond to the feedback about Dragon Age Origins being too easy, but in Trespasser, the ramped up difficulty almost felt like an overcorrection. Admittedly, I know I'm not the most skilled player, I've admitted this several times in other videos, but I feel like Trespasser would have benefited from a more consistent difficulty level. The standard enemies in this DLC sometimes felt tougher than the final battle with Corypheus, which is surprising. The challenge seemed to distract from the story's emotional weight and hindered the pacing, especially for a narrative-focused DLC like this one, where the intensity of the stakes alone was enough to keep the players invested. I'm not sure how many people would agree, but I do feel a smoother difficulty curve would have allowed for the DLC's plot and dramatic moments to shine through even more. For me, that consistency would have created a better flow, letting us focus on the gravity of the Inquisitor's final stand against Solus, without feeling like every enemy encounter was a wall to scale. But maybe that's just me. Either way, now with the Veilguard just a few days away, Inquisition feels like the perfect warm-up to reacquaint yourself with Thedas. It gives just enough of that magic touch that defines BioWare games while keeping you curious for what's next. If the Veilguard builds on what Inquisition established, refining the combat, slimming down the pacing, which is what it seems to be doing, we could be in for something truly special. If you ever felt like tackling Dragon Age Inquisition or revisiting it, don't let its size or unique mechanics put you off. Sometimes games click with us only when we're ready, and after years of putting it off, I'm glad I finally gave this one a proper chance. It's been a journey full of great characters, memorable moments, and a sense of discovery that, even its slowest parts, ultimately felt rewarding. For those hesitant about the gameplay, I'd say give it time, because Dragon Age Inquisition is absolutely worth diving into before the Veilguard.